Look, I think it's fair to say that we spend quite a lot of time on this channel talking about the captains of the Gotei 13. And why wouldn't we? They're some of the most enduringly popular characters in Bleach, and across the numerous different iterations of the Gotei 13, they are a varied and always interesting bunch of vastly complex Shinigami. From the founder of the Gotei 13, the stalwart authoritarian Yamamoto, to the proud noble Byakuya, and then even further beyond that to the likes of the traitorous mastermind Aizen and the maniacal mad scientist Mayuri, we've been exposed to these characters a lot. And for the most part, I genuinely think Kubo does a decent job at spreading the love around over the course of Bleach. But it's also true that not every captain is created equal. For every Kyoraku and Kenpachi, you get a few captains who don't receive quite the same level of love and spotlight, even if they deserve to do so. So in today's video, I wanted to discuss and shed some light on who the most underrated Bleach captains might be, and why that's the case, why they're considered to be so. What does it really mean to be underrated in a series like Bleach, and what could have been done to help lift these few characters up to a similar status as their more popular, more exposed peers? As always, make sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Who is the most underrated captain in Bleach from any of the different lineups of the Gotei 13, and why? Before we get started on the video today, guys, if you happen to enjoy this video, consider hitting subscribe down below, as it does help the channel out a lot and your support is greatly appreciated. And the same goes for my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, where again, we're trying to reach 15,000 subs by the end of the year, and your support would make a huge difference in helping us to reach that goal too. But again, no matter how you decide to support me, whether it's just being here and watching and enjoying the videos, that also makes a massive difference. So thank you all so very much. So, what exactly does it mean to be underrated, to be considered underrated? Well, in a series like Bleach, it can have a few meanings. Perhaps the simplest and most obvious meaning of the bunch is when people underestimate or undervalue a character's strength among the cast, especially when there's actual evidence that points to the contrary. And yeah, we'll certainly be looking at that today, that's a part of this wider video. But I also want to consider what else underrated might mean here. We're talking about characters who have a lot more depth to them than people let on, as well as their overall impact, not just on the characters around them, but also on the world and narrative of Bleach. There are certain characters who simply have a bigger presence than first thought. And then, finally, perhaps the ultimate indicator of how underrated a character is to simply look at what the community thinks of them, and why they've cultivated such a reputation over the course of the series. Do they deserve it? And if not, why not? With all that said and done, let's dive into these 5 captains that I want to talk about today. I want to look at why I think they're underrated, why that might not be justified, and then end by deciding on who is the most underrated captain of this sorry bunch. So, first up, we've got the captain of Squad 2, Soi Fon, who I think it can often feel like exists almost perpetually within Yoruichi's shadow. After all, Yoruichi is kind of the proto-Soi Fon in a sense. She's the only other captain in the entire series to really do what Soi Fon does, and she kind of does it better in almost every single way, which certainly doesn't help. From unleashing Shunko in the Soul Society arc to taking on some of the strongest enemies in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, with both her incredible Hakuda skill and unparalleled speed as the Goddess of Flash. Not only that, but when it comes to their personalities, Yoruichi is eminently likeable, while Soi Fon's stiff, stubborn demeanour makes her an easy target for ridicule, even if that too is unfair. And no, it's not fair to count Soi Fon out so easily, and she has a lot to offer. Her Zanpakuto Suzumebachi is one of the most unique in the series, allowing Soi Fon to pull off the perfect assassination in just 2 hits. It's incredibly cool, and very cathartic when you finally get to see it in action after so many years. On top of that, I just love both Soi Fon's overall character design, which I think comes together flawlessly, and her motif, that of a hornet and a hornet's sting, is absolutely perfect. Even Jakuho Raikoben feels like it fits the character to a T, despite not outwardly seeming so. But it's those intricacies, it's those layers that work so nicely for her and help to round her out into a more three-dimensional character. Soi Fon is often criticised for her outbursts, particularly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, which can come across as childish and immature, despite her hardline authoritarian nature, and I hold my hands up as someone who has readily criticised her for that in the past. Yet while Yoruichi may be the more popular, and yes, powerful, of the Omnitsukido leaders that we've seen in the manga, the truth is that Soi Fon simply holds that title for the entirety of the present-day storyline, giving her a position of real power and responsibility within the Gotei 13 and the wider Soul Society that she has commanded expertly for many years. It doesn't help as well that it can feel like the deck is stacked against Soi Fon within the narrative itself, and it's a shame that she routinely comes up against opponents throughout Bleach who serve to make her look lesser. Of course, she fights Yoruichi in the Soul Society arc, as I said, a character whom Soi Fon is practically designed to lose to. And then there's Baragon in the Rankar arc. And that fight is interesting in its own right as well, whereas almost every single battle against an Espada is a mirror match of some kind. You've got Byakuya and Zamari, who are both very speed-focused. You've got Kenpachi versus Neutra, who both proclaim to be the strongest, who both have impossible-to-cut bodies. And yet the tables were completely flipped for Soi Fon, and she came up against the one character who could actively shut her down at nearly every turn. She is a predominantly hand-to-hand combatant who has to get in close to defeat her enemies, and even in his base form, Baragon's time dilation field totally stops her in her tracks. Would I have liked a little more development out of Soi Fon by the end of the manga? Sure, and I think she's even a little in danger of becoming Flanderized in her interactions with Omaida in particular. She feels like a character who hasn't really moved that much over the course of many, many years. But on the other hand, she does feel quite underrated to me, despite having one of the slickest designs in the series and a genuinely cool and impactful position within the wider lore of the Soul Society. Up next, we've got one of my favourite captains of the bunch. And of course it's Rojuro Otoribashi, one of the Vizard captains and the captain of the 3rd Division. Now look, it's totally understandable, to be honest, that Rose is likely one of the least popular, most underrated captains of the bunch, and that I don't think the community has a great opinion of him overall. Kubo never really lets him do anything, and that's of course true of almost all of the Vizard. In the entirety of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Rose throws maybe 2 attacks total, including his bankai. It's pretty dire. And not only that, but as a Vizard captain not named Shinji, there's a weird distinction, I think, between Rose and the other captains that's never been outwardly addressed, although it may have been in a meta sense, and kind of goes unspoken. But it's pretty clear that as one of these returning Vizard captains not named Shinji, he's not really allowed to get anywhere near the main narrative whatsoever. He has little to no relationship with Ichigo, which will always hurt his involvement in the main story, and well and truly exists as a captain on the periphery. Like he's only there because, well, the 3rd Division needs a captain and Kubo has no plans for him otherwise, and that's a shame. He's window dressing in the form of a captain, only there to fill a position. And yeah, like I said, that is a shame because ultimately Rose is a really cool character. And I know I'm biased, obviously, but I'm here to stand up for him, who stands out as feeling very unique from the rest of the cast. His music-themed Zanpakuto is literally one of a kind in the world of Bleach, in a world that's otherwise chock full of the likes of Fire Zanpakuto or Melee Zanpakuto. Rose really does stand alone, and his Bankai Kinshara Butodan is genuinely extremely dangerous, even if Kubo had to write him out of the story in a silly way. But Kinshara Butodan wielding music-based illusions that can conjure up fire and water at once, and maybe even straight up stop a character's breath, is pretty crazy, and I hope we get to see it utilised more. Again though, when it comes to the Vizard, I can't help but totally get it. There really isn't much to go on here. Rose has an awesome design too, featuring a theatricality and flamboyance to him with his many frills and curls and the demure aloof messiness, the unkempt nature of an English rock star. Again, there's no one else quite like him. I guess it's a good problem to have, right? Like, Kubo's cast of characters is so completely stacked with incredible material that even those relegated to the secondary or even tertiary supporting cast are fantastic in their own right. Now, Rose isn't a tertiary level character, he is a secondary level character for sure, but we don't know much about Rose. He has virtually no impact on the overarching narrative or world around him. But there's no denying the sheer creativity involved in bringing this character to life in a big way. Alright, you probably knew this next one was going to grace this video at some point, but I can't not talk about, again, one of my personal favourite captains, the captain of Squad 7, Sajin Komamura. And I know that's now 2 in a row, but I promise this video isn't just me sticking up for my favourites, although maybe I should be. Now, Komamura finds himself in a slightly weird spot these days, because I'm not really sure how underrated he actually is anymore. Certainly, during the time of the Rankar arc, despite his incredible fight with Tosen, Komamura was absolutely considered to be one of the worst, to generalize, worst captains among the bunch. Not only did people think he was really weak, conjuring his bankai against a fraction and ultimately losing to Tosen, though more on that in a moment, but he was simply unpopular. His unwavering dedication to Yamamoto, his commitment to loyalty, and his generally humorless demeanour meant that it was hard for him to win people over, despite the fact that, he's a big wolf man, which is pretty cool in my opinion, but he's simply never going to resonate with people as much as characters like Byakuya, Gin, or Kenpachi, for example. These days, though, well, the 1,000-Year Blood War arc was somewhat transformative for the character, in a way that kind of reminds me of what the arc did for Unohana, although on a slightly smaller scale. He undergoes an incredibly cool and surprisingly heartfelt, no pun intended, subplot after his bankai is stolen, and his human transformation as a result of the Jinka no Jutsu of his Beastman clan is maybe one of the arc's most gratifying plot twists. For the most part, Komamura is handled really well here, but there is that lingering sense that for whatever reason, the character remains underserved. Unlike virtually every other captain that actually wins a fight against the Stern Ritter, and it's not many, believe me, Komamura's victory comes with an unreasonably high cost, seemingly designed to write him out of the story for good, which kinda sucks. And look, to be totally honest, if you're gonna do that, you may as well follow through. Because I think, personally, Komamura either still had more to give, or again, if this is what you want to do with him, he probably should have simply just been killed off for his transgression. Where the character stands currently, reduced to a wordless wolf whom we've never seen again, feels like a liminal spot devoid of any real closure, and he deserves better. But in regards to character relationships that foster and build throughout the story itself, Komamura's story with Tosen is absolutely, surprisingly, one of the very best, one of the richest in all of Bleach. It comes full circle in a way that's totally satisfying, and is one of the few character dynamics to encompass the entire series, and to do so very successfully. On top of that, what's not to love about this character's design? Seriously, Komamura looks awesome in each of his many different iterations, whether he's wearing a helmet to conceal his identity or not. While his Shikai, Tenken, is a bit lacking, his Bankai, Kokujo Tengen Myo, is one of the most visually impressive of the entire manga, manifesting an enormous, towering, heavily armoured giant wielding a massive blade. A colossal samurai who copies every single one of Komamura's own moves. And again, while Komamura's Bankai used to be scoffed at, looked down upon, and dismissed for being lumbering, weak, and, to be honest, practically useless, Even that has changed in recent years, or at least I think it has. In the wake of the reveal that a broken bankai can never be fixed, a genuinely devastating addition to the lore for the usage of bankai throughout Bleach, save for Komamura's alone, well, I'd say that constitutes a pretty decent buff. Besides, there's more to just Komamura's character than winning fights. The sheer density of themes, whether that's virtue, friendship, or even revenge, packed into this one underrated captain is absurd, and he has so much to offer. The captain of the 9th Division, Kaname Tosen, feels much the same as Komamura in many respects to me, and also feels very underrated. Tosen finds himself, though, in a difficult spot to occupy for much of the series. As one of the 3 treacherous captains, suddenly, out of nowhere, essentially his closest counterparts become Aizen and Gin. 2 of the coolest, most popular captains, hell, even characters, of the entire series. And I don't think that's hyperbole. And I hate to say it, but in terms of sheer likability, Tosen could never really stack up. He's similar to Komamura in that way. He's the straight man to Gin's foil and the zealous follower to Aizen's Machiavellian overlord, inherently more straightforward and less interesting than someone like Gin, whose motives are much less clear, or someone like Aizen, who is extraordinarily over the top in the best possible ways. Despite that, though, despite those inherent struggles, Tosen may just be one of the best written captains in the series. In many ways, it feels like Tosen is often overlooked because he's not as bombastic or as explosive as some of the other stronger personalities in the bunch, but he is a deeply philosophical thinker, a hypocritical man, haunted by a desire for justice, one that leads him into Aizen's clutches. This might be a very reductive way to look at it, but I can't help but wonder if Tosen is one of those characters whom you simply come to appreciate a lot more with age. I know for a fact that when I started Bleach as a stupid teenager, I thought Tosen was really boring, and again he is kind of squashed amidst larger-than-life characters. But it's just not true. At best, he's misunderstood. At worst, he's a madman who has completely lost sight of his true path and become utterly corrupted. His arc is brilliant, and it leads him to his ultimate conflict with Komamura and Hisagi. In my opinion, and I've gone on record making a whole video about this fight before, one of the finest battles in all of Bleach. So, while Tosen might not have the same immediate allure as the likes of Aizen and Gin, he is a wonderful character all the same, and one who feels underappreciated to me. Add to that the fact that Tosen's Zanpakuto Suzumushi is only truly seen in action once, and he loses his 2 main fights. It's not hard to see why people tend to overlook him, or even rank him among the weakest of the captains. But again, it is not the case, and Tosen is fascinating in that through him, we see the hollowification of a Shinigami taken to its highest and perhaps most perfect form outside of Ichigo. He's a poetic character, one who played his part well and bowed out when the time was right, but whose influence lingers on and continues to be felt in Komamura's story long after his death. And finally, we've got a captain whom you all probably saw coming. It's the captain of the 13th Division, Jushiro Ukitake. Now, is it fair to say Ukitake is underrated? I guess that depends on what definition of underrated we're using. I think almost everyone understands that despite not getting the chance to really see him fight, well, at all, he is extraordinarily powerful, and as one of the elder captains of the Gotei 13, he is one of the most revered and respected of them all. Again, despite his uniquely soft and kindly nature, I don't think there are many people who have read Bleach that are under any kind of misconception or illusion where Ukitake's power is concerned. No, Ukitake's main issue comes from the fact that he spends almost the entire narrative living in someone else's shadow, Kyoraku Shunsui's. It's not done on purpose, I don't think, or through fault of either of the characters per se. Maybe it is simply built into their dynamic. Kyoraku is the loud, brash, and flamboyant one of the duo, while again Ukitake is sickly and quiet. But I think it's painfully obvious that Kubo had a favourite. It starts out small, innocuous even. Kyoraku gets a short fight against Chad in the Soul Society arc, while Ukitake doesn't even appear in the arc until about halfway through, and then together they destroy the Sokyoku and prepare to face Yamamoto. No, it's not really until the end of the Urankar arc that a true gulf begins to open up between them in Kubo's treatment of the two. Ukitake is immediately taken out by Wonder Weiss upon the Arankar's arrival, a move, looking back in retrospect, that it seems would kind of seal the captain's fate into irrelevancy moving forward, while Kyoraku was able to continue onward, fighting and killing Stark and later battling Aizen. It does feel like this is the inflection moment. This is the point that sets both characters on their paths for the rest of the series. Kyoraku gets a short fight in the first invasion, and ends up becoming the head captain of the Gotei 13, as his relationship with Yamamoto is played up considerably more than Ukitake's. While Ukitake gets, well, all of nothing, essentially, and then completely vanishes for the entirety of the second invasion, only to later return and, well, die. Sure, the Mimihagi reveal is really nice, and tying Ukitake into the lore of the Soul King was awesome, but in terms of exposure, in terms of long-term relevance, he gets the short end of the stick. It's absolutely true that despite Kyoraku and Ukitake essentially having the same relationship with Yamamoto, certainly in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, you would be forgiven for thinking that to Ukitake, Yamamoto meant little more to him than the average captain. Now, to be fair, there are some small hints here and there. Ukitake is one of the few captains to realise and mention the fact that Zanka no Tachi has been activated, and later, when Yamamoto is killed, Kyoraku and Ukitake both sense his death, and it's their reaction we get, although Ukitake's is again minimised when compared to Kyoraku's. Kyoraku is the one who goes to visit the site of Yamamoto's death, and of course it's Kyoraku who essentially inherits everything of Yamamoto's moving forward. And in fact, it's true that of the four elder captains, Ukitake really does feel like he gets shafted, ultimately. Even if Yamamoto and Unohana both die, at least the two of them go out in an incredible blaze of glory. Yamamoto gets one of the biggest and best fights of the entire arc, while Unohana dies amidst a revelation that completely rewrote and transformed her character in the eyes of the community. Ukitake's sacrifice, at least in the manga, is ultimately in vain, and dealt with in a few chapters flat. So yeah, while Ukitake should theoretically command respect, it absolutely feels like he is overlooked by many, and that is due to his proximity to a much more popular and better utilised character. Despite Ukitake's deep relevance to Rukia in particular, again in the manga all of that is dealt with in the Soul Society arc and never really revisited. And so those are my picks for the 5 most commonly underrated captains in Bleach. But I could see an argument for some others too, perhaps Kensei, for example, although I'm not certain he has much more to offer. Hell, I'm probably underrating him by leaving him off this list. And I know I'm guilty of putting even some of these characters down at times too. But if I had to say who I thought was the single most underrated captain in Bleach, now that all is said and done, honestly, I think I'm going to go with Tosen. Tosen's character has so much to give, is so layered and intricate, and yet I think gets almost entirely overlooked, primarily due to his affiliation with 2 extremely popular villains in Aizen and Gin, with Tosen almost feeling like a third wheel that doesn't quite fit. And the fact that despite his power, his evolving power, his showing in the manga isn't all that impressive. His bankai is fantastic, and as one of Aizen's right-hand men, he plays a huge role in the narrative, helping to hollowify the Vizards and therefore cause the exile of characters like Kisuke and Yoruichi, while later working with Aizen to experiment on and create White, which would of course lead to none other than Ichigo, as we know him today. Tosen therefore has a hand in many of the biggest events of Bleach, but it absolutely feels like he doesn't quite get the respect or love a character of his depth deserves. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you agree with my list of 5 captains who I think are perhaps the most underrated in all of Bleach, or do you think someone else should have been given a spot? Maybe Kensei, maybe someone totally different. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, so do please let me know. Once again, consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. Consider checking out my other channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games as well. And as always, a huge thank you and a massive shout out goes out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without who I simply wouldn't be able to keep doing this. Your support makes all the difference, and it truly does mean everything, so thank you all so very much. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.